St. Patrick's Church on Camp Street in the central business district of New Orleans has often been described as one of the most stunning English Gothic churches in the United States. One of the oldest churches in New Orleans, St. Patrick's has extraordinary details in the art and architecture, as well as plenty of interesting souls who have left their mark on this church. This history will focus on the overlooked details of St. Patrick's. There is a brochure available at the entrance with the church's free walking tour. In 1992, after completing an extensive renovation, Samuel Wilson Jr. wrote the book, St. Patrick's Church, 1833 through 1992, which includes a history of the priests to that point as well. St. Patrick's is such a beautiful church that it has twice served as the pro-cathedral for the Archdiocese of New Orleans, while St. Louis Cathedral underwent renovations. New Orleanians will travel past several churches to go to Mass at St. Patrick's, a fact which keeps it alive today. It was named a National Historic Landmark in 1975. You are welcome to enter the church if a Mass or ceremony is not happening to enjoy the art and architecture. Please be respectful during your experience. I recommend entering the church and finding a seat for the majority of the tour. I like to use binoculars to see the details of the art more closely. The pews are cypress that were sold to pay for the building of this church in the 1830s and 1840s and refurbished in the 1990s. According to a Times-Picayune article from 2000, they are purposefully left to creak and crack, so don't try to outsmart it. According to legend and the free tour brochure, St. Patrick's Church was built in the Faubourg Saint-Marie, now the Central Business District, because the Irish immigrants wanted a church where God spoke English. The Irish started traveling to New Orleans in the colonial era, famously with General Alexander O'Reilly's takeover for the Spanish crown in 1769. The Irish continued immigrating to the city with spikes after the 1798 rebellion in Ireland and in the 1810s due to economic downturn, crop failures, and deadly epidemics, according to The Irish in New Orleans by Laura D. Kelley. Irish immigration also coincided with the building of the new Basin Canal in the 1830s. See my video about whether the Superdome is haunted to learn more about the Irish and the new Basin Canal. Before the church was here, this area was cypress swamp outside the bounds of the city. Then it was the plantation of John Gravier and part of the plantation of the Jesuits, according to this 1875 copy of a 1798 map by Charles Trudeau, the city surveyor. This map also points out that 15 arpents fronting the river was already confiscated by His Very Christian Majesty, which included the Camp Street lot where St. Patrick's was built 35 years later. At the turn of the century, the city started expanding more rapidly to accommodate the new Americans arriving to town after the Louisiana Purchase and the refugees coming after the Haitian Revolution. By 1815, the city had 2 suburbs above and below. This is an 1825 update to the previous 1815 map showing a triumphal arch in Place d'Armes, now Jackson Square, and a new center tower completed by Benjamin Latrobe on the cathedral. I couldn't find anything at this address before St. Patrick's was built in 1833, but my best guess is that this block was coffee and tobacco warehouses. The first St. Patrick's was established in 1833, and this building was opened for worship in 1840. Some histories will report that this is the oldest church outside the French Quarter, but Our Lady of Guadalupe Church, or the Old Mortuary Chapel, was built in 1826. Maybe that's still the French Quarter, or maybe chapels don't count. According to the Archdiocese, St. Patrick's was the second church parish established in New Orleans. A new parish was needed because of the city's prosperity and rapid growth. For over a century, New Orleans had one church, the St. Louis Cathedral. The Old Mortuary Chapel was used for funerals from its construction in 1826. 1833 is the year that the Garden District became the city of Lafayette, expanding the suburbs even further from the old city center. The first church was wooden, and this church was built around the original structure. There is some controversy about who the architect was. It was originally designed by the Dakin brothers, Charles and James. In his obituary, James is given credit for the structure, but James Gallier takes credit for finishing the structure in his autobiography. The newspaper articles seem to fastidiously leave out the architect and builder in articles from the time. One article mentions postponing building to let the foundation settle. Gallier wrote, quote, "A plan having been made by Dacon for a new Catholic church in Camp Street, he was employed by the committee to superintend its erection. But when the walls of the building had reached nearly to the roof, a disagreement between Dacon and the managers took place, and he withdrew from the undertaking. After much delay, the managers employed me to finish the structure, but before the walls of the tower had risen above the roof, they began to settle down toward one side from a defective foundation, so that I had to take out the old foundation and put in a new one without pulling down the walls. This caused much trouble and expense, but I finally succeeded in accomplishing it, so that it has stood firmly to the present day. The whole of the interior arrangements, the groin ceilings, the altar, the organ, etc., were erected after my designs and under my superintendence." Unquote. Indeed, the sketches at the Library of Congress of the altar say designed and erected by J. Gallier, even though only Dacon and Dacon are listed in the citation. According to the church, quote, "In 1839, James Gallier, one of the city's most prominent architects, took over the project, giving the gift of sacred beauty to generations of worshippers to come." Unquote. According to Wilson, the iron column visible near the confessional was added by Gallier to reinforce the bell tower. St. Patrick's is an English Gothic church. The centerpiece is a stained glass dome above the altar depicting 10 angels. There is a little mystery surrounding the stained glass in the dome of the altar. It was part of the original design. An 1840 article in the Picayune explains, quote, "The sanctuary containing the altar is at the east end in a deep and lofty recess, surrounded by columns and arches, and surmounted by an exquisitely constructed canopy, from which light will be made to fall through stained glass upon the altar." Unquote. In this image from a 1914 article in the Times-Picayune, there is what appears to be stained glass in the dome, but it does not appear to be the glass with the 10 angels that is there today. This 1978 article clearly shows the same stained glass as today. The walking tour brochure available at the church says the stained glass fan was installed in 1916. In this article from 1974 about renovations on 842 Camp Street, they point out that the original builders of the home were the donors of the stained glass fan, but don't name them. In this 1963 photo from the Library of Congress, we get to see the other side of the dome and the light that is made to fall through it. You can see the details of the stained glass and clearly see why 2 end windows are darker than the rest. On Google Maps, 2 skylights are visible over the dome as well. In 1983, when Samuel Wilson Jr. was completing renovations, an article explained, quote, "The large stained glass dome over the altar is very interesting, despite the fact that its date of origin is unknown. The present stained glass dates from the early 20th century, as do the rest of the memorial windows. Whether or not the present glass in the dome replaces glass or plaster is not known." Unquote. According to the Society of Architectural Historians, quote, "After the hurricane of 1915, most of the original glass was replaced with new designs by the Emile Fry Art Glass Company of St. Louis, including the stained glass between the ribs of the semicircular apse vault." Unquote. Emile Fry and Associates has been in operation since 1898, according to its website. Examining the details, you can see that the 2 centerpieces are inscribed, quote, "In memory of my dear uncle Joseph Lenez." I truly don't know how to pronounce this name, as I couldn't find much information about its origin. But Joseph Lenez was born in 1831 and died in 1916. He is buried in Metairie Cemetery. He married Josephine Elliott, and they had children that Joseph outsurvived. He was president of the Carrollton Railway Company from 1894 through 1898, and his residence at the time of his death was 842 Camp Street. The details line up with the tour brochure and the article from the 1970s. Joseph left most of his estate to his niece, Selenera L. Correjoles, as he died with no direct descendants. He was listed on the charter as having 10 shares of the Louisiana Oil Company when it was incorporated in 1871, so that estate was quite vast. She also died with no descendants in 1936 and left the estate to Charity Hospital. The rest of the memorial windows are described in the walking tour guide available at the church. The massive, stunning frescoes on the altar were completed in 1841 by Leon de Pomarede. His name is spelled many different ways, and he's sometimes remembered as Louis de la Pomarede or Pierre de la Pomarede, but he is always credited with painting the altar of St. Patrick's. He was an artist who just passed through New Orleans from France and did most of his work in St. Louis. This work is considered a masterpiece. Today, the center painting is the Transfiguration. Christ on water is to the right, and St. Patrick baptizing the princess daughters of the Irish king on the left. In many of the write-ups on St. Patrick's and its renovations over the years, it's noted that these 3 original murals are left untouched. But it's unclear if that's true. Most of the descriptions did not put the paintings in the placements they are today. In 1899, a fire broke out in the church. During the fire, 2 memorial windows were broken, one for Father Fallon and one for Mrs. McCune. The newspaper reported that a painting was also destroyed in the fire. Quote, "Painted on one of the walls was a picture of St. Patrick baptizing one of Ireland's queens, and this is ruined. It is a loss that cannot be replaced." Unquote. This painting is the altar fresco on the left today, but the article describes the fire as in the right sacristy. In 1911, the paintings were described as, quote, "They are in the order right to left behind the sanctuary, the Transfiguration, St. Patrick baptizing the Queen of Ireland, and Lord Jesus Christ saving Peter from drowning," unquote. In this 1941 article, the paintings were in yet another order, with the Transfiguration in the center, but St. Patrick on the right and Christ walking on water on the left. I found these images of the church in 1912 and 1914. Can you tell which painting is which? Since at least 1955, the paintings have been located in their current placement. But I'll be honest, maybe I don't understand what these articles mean by left and right of the altar. Although the newspaper mentions that the church was insured for $20,000, I couldn't find any restoration efforts immediately following the 1899 fire. In 1904, 2 additional statues were added to the church: Our Lady of Lourdes, which is on the right if you're facing the altar, and the Sacred Heart of Jesus, which is on the left side of the altar. Then, in 1911, artist Marie-Thérèse Bernard de Jaham restored the murals, according to this newspaper article. She was an active painter, restorer, and copyist in New Orleans during her life. The Encyclopedia of New Orleans Artists gives her credit for the murals in St. Augustine, but doesn't mention her work in St. Patrick's. Besides for touching up the ancient murals behind the altar, she also added 4 new paintings. She completed background paintings for both the Pietà and the statue of St. Patrick. She also painted 2 new murals in the huge niches on either side of the altar. One was the Resurrection, and the other was the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin. None of her paintings remain. She was featured in this article about novel professions for women in 1912. Less than a year later, in 1912, Melville Belmont, an artist from Boston, redid the 2 side niches with original paintings, Resurrection, and a copy of Murillo's Immaculate Conception, according to this article. But in 1913, these paintings were damaged when a warehouse next to the church caught fire. In 1914, the completed renovation was written up describing 2 new huge paintings on either side of the altar. You can see these paintings in the photograph included with the article. In the one on the left, St. Raymond was depicted. A statue of St. Raymond was also added during these renovations. He was the patron saint of the priest at the time, Father Raymond Cara. The painting on the right was still the Immaculate Conception. The St. Raymond statue is now in the narthex of the church. The article doesn't list who the painter of the new murals was, and none of these murals are there now. In 1926, a refugee priest from Mexico named Yves Graul added new paintings. Quote, "On the gospel side of the church, in the space above the gallery, Father Graul has executed an original conception of the ascension of Christ into heaven. This takes the place of the picture of St. Raymond that was so familiar to those who attend this church. On the corresponding wall space on the epistle side, he has portrayed the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin into heaven, combining ideas that have been used by various artists. This takes the place of the old painting of the Assumption. Each picture is 29 by 18 feet, unquote." In 1950, the murals were restored again by Carrillo Tanco. This restoration started in 1941 with a new priest. Tango's murals are described as additions to the church above the shrines and stations of the cross. Quote, "The murals behind the altar painted by Pierre de la Pomarede will be left untouched. But on other side of these, Tango has placed figures of 3 angels. Beneath the murals of the angels are symbols of the evangelists, the lion, the man, ox, and eagle. All have been painted on canvas and applied to the walls." Unquote. These murals are also no longer there. The Encyclopedia of New Orleans Artists does not include Grail or Tango because it features artists from the years 1718 through 1918. Renovations occurred throughout the 1970s, and in 1990, a major renovation was completed by Samuel Wilson Jr. All of the previous stencil details and murals, except the altar murals, were replaced with creamy white, light gray, blue, and golden paint, brightening the interior of the church, along with structural changes to ensure the integrity of the building. If you look closely at the details around the altar murals, you can see the trompe-l'oeil painting to mimic the actual details of the church. Even though building the church resulted in significant debt, court cases, and the church's seizure by the sheriff, the ladies of the church raised enough to buy the first organ soon after this church was constructed. It arrived in 1843. In order to prevent the seizure of the organ to pay the debt holders, quote, they had the state legislature declare the organ specified as excluded from any litigations, unquote. According to Wilson, in 1914 or 1915, the organ from Trinity Episcopal Church replaced the 1843 organ. It was an 1887 Odell Opus 239. Even though this organ was damaged in the 1915 hurricane, it was used until 1962, when a custom-built organ from M.P. Moeller, Inc. of Maryland replaced it. The present organ, the Patrick J. Murphy Pipe Organ Opus 53, was donated in 2009 by Betty S. Snow and her children in memory of their late husband and father, James A. Snow, Jr. James's father was a governor of Louisiana. WNOE radio station was founded by and named for Governor Snow and owned by the Snow family until 1989. It is now owned by iHeartMedia. Betty and James are buried in Metairie Cemetery. I have 2 favorite details that are left out of any descriptions I can find. The first is the scallop shell amplifying device behind the epistle side of the lectern. This is a feature in St. Louis Cathedral also. It is not original to the church and was added sometime between 1914 and 1941. I also love the subtle dove detail in the center of the arch above the altar, representing the Holy Spirit. The dove isn't in the sketches for the altar, nor is it discernible in the early images I found. It's clear in the 1955 postcard of the interior of the church, along with the details added by Carmelo Tango. Perhaps this is an edition of Tango that Samuel Wilson kept in his renovation. As you proceed to exit the church, take in the statues dotting chapels and aisles. There are 12.5 statues in St. Patrick's, beginning with 4 in the narthex or vestibule of the church. I was only able to find details about a few of them, including a couple of stamps listing the studios. The Mary statue in the back of the church by St. Lucy was produced by the Coletta Studios in St. Louis, which shared a space with Emile Fry, who made the stained glass. This chart lists the statues and any information I could find about the art. The walking tour guide available at the church includes the religious significance of the saints and their causes. For instance, quote, St. Lucy was a Christian martyr during the persecution of the Emperor Diocletian. She is the patroness of sight and is often depicted holding a pair of eyes on a golden plate, unquote. The first mentions of adding a clock to the bell tower I found was in 1851. It was finally added in 1926, 75 years later, replacing stained glass. The bell of St. Patrick's was the dean of all New Orleans bells, according to this 1921 article, because of a specific deep tone. It was cast in Cincinnati and installed before 1850. This article is a woman complaining of the early ringing of the cracked bell. An updated plaque in the narthex now explains that the tower bells of historic St. Patrick's Church dedicated to the glory and honor of God are a gift of Mademoiselle Stella J. Roman in memory of her mother and sister. The bell system is designed by André M. Faget. Stella was from an old Creole family and a great niece of Andre Bienvenu Roman, who twice served as governor of Louisiana. Her great-grandfather was A.B.'s brother. Jacques Etienne Roman, Stella's two-time great-grandfather, was the son of the founder of Oak Alley Plantation in St. James Parish, Louisiana. Stella was a nurse at Hotel Dieu and a cat lover who never married. Before her retirement, she ran a nursing home out of her home at 1641 Amelia Street. 1641 Amelia has such a storied history that her family isn't included in the plaque outside the home. Stella was thanked in many obituaries for her service. Stella formed a foundation to provide bells to churches, and many churches in the area can boast bells because of her charity. Andre was an electrical engineer who trademarked electronic bells. His father was a famous physician who conducted research on yellow fever. His grandfather was also a physician who didn't see why the suffering of women during childbirth couldn't be alleviated and introduced the use of chloroform in New Orleans. Andre's brother Frank had a son, Edward, who had a daughter, Mignon. Mignon Faget is a jewelry designer today of Magazine Street fame. The lasting lore about St. Patrick's is that it was a parish meant to have English Mass for the Irish immigrants. But almost as soon as it was built, St. Patrick's was advertising French sermons. In the 1940s, this sign indicates that this was a very diverse parish where the language of the people was celebrated. In the mid-20th century, a return to the Latin Mass ended with Vatican II and the decision to once again hold Mass in the vernacular languages. Yet St. Patrick's, which was established to provide Mass in a vernacular language, according to all histories written about the church, holds daily Mass in Latin to this day. In 2025, St. Patrick's is once again raising money for a renovation. Thank you for joining me on this tour of St. Patrick's Church in New Orleans. One of the Irish immigrants to New Orleans that helped make St. Patrick's flourish was Margaret Howery. We will meet her next on our tour of Irish New Orleans. Please like and subscribe for more tours and stories from the deep, coming soon.